Welcome to the Still Life podcast, a series of 21 topics, with each episode exploring the practical nature of the spiritual experience, with time-tested insights from psychotherapy, evolutionary biology, and meditation from ex-animator and stillness coach, Jim.
Because I view Jim George as a trainer for the soul. There's no better animation artist, drawer than Jim.
He is a friend, he is a mentor, incredible advisor. There's no one who's more important to me in my life.
The most interesting, most intelligent person I've ever met.
He truly is somebody who wants nothing from you and everything for you.
My name is Henry, and I'm a former client of Jim's, and the work we've done together over the past 8 years has changed my life. We're now on a mission to share these insights with you, and to draw some pretty interesting conclusions on how to live a still life. I'd like to talk about consciousness.
Ooh, yeah.
So I think that, again, it's one of these terms, similar to belief, similar to, well, really all of the ones that we've covered so far.
Yeah, you make it pretty challenging, I've got to tell you.
Well, I think the challenge really lies in how we want to tackle the word.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because with spirit, that was one that's like, well, what level do we want to talk about this on?
Sure.
Right? You know, do we want to talk about this on the booze shelves, or do we want to talk about
Right.
this in the religious sense, or like where
That's
do we want to
exactly
go?
right.
Well, with consciousness, that word gets misused, not misused, but used in a lot of different contexts, which can kind of blur its edges,
Yes,
make it difficult to define.
yes,
And even defining it itself has kind of stumped some of the most brilliant minds in history.
it's true.
So just to sort of set the context, you know, consciousness has been referred to as some type of life force. You know, we like to say that animals are conscious, and there's even some argue that plants and fungi are conscious. And then there's also, we use it in the sense where it's like, I'm awake, I'm conscious, or I'm unconscious. Like if you watch a boxing match and some guy knocks the other unconscious, that's some reason to celebrate, right?
Okay.
And then
Depends on which side you're on, but sure.
yes.
Yeah.
And then we also have conscious awareness of, like, I can be conscious of different areas
Yes.
of my body at certain times. And so those are just sort of three realms that immediately come to mind when thinking about how difficult it would be to define the term.
Yeah.
And so I would now like to pass it over to you, where it's like, how do you define consciousness?
That question in the field of physics is what is known as the hard problem. Just to be clear, you didn't ask me what's the definition, you said what's my definition, because I'm just a guy. And I've had some time on this earth to work things out, doing the best I can, but that's all we're doing. This is an inquiry together. We're exploring it. So given that, I like to think of consciousness as the subjective experience of being, the subjective experience of being anything or anyone, from the most rudimentary, fundamental quantum level, all the way up through us to the most infinitely large astrophysical level, including the universe itself and everything in it. Let's turn to philosophy. After we look at the word itself, consciousness, conscious, we always want to look for clues in the word itself. Con, from the Latin root cum, with, and scientia, or in Latin pronunciation, scientia. The C was actually hard, but it's anglicized to scientia, knowing. You can almost hear the word science in scientia, can't you? Because it's the same root. So even thousands of years ago, they knew something about consciousness with knowing. But we want to climb into this thing as broadly and deeply as we can. So if we jump over to philosophy, philos, love or love of, sophos, wisdom. Not enough to just know something. They love wisdom. They want to know what to do with that knowing. So we want both science, knowing, the pursuit of knowledge, and wisdom. So we're going to start mixing those two right now. And I'd like to suggest that's where we're going to find so much in the way of answers to these things. You can see right away what the challenge is, what makes this question the hard question. And a brilliant Australian philosopher named David Chalmers articulated this, because he just went right after the explanatory problem, never mind the content, the explanatory problem of this intrinsic subjective nature of consciousness, this subjective first-person point of view, and the objective third-person point of view that's become the holy grail of Western science. Western science is pretty much disinterested in the first-person subjective experience. In fact, they edit it out. They try to remove any subjectivity from anything they're studying, which is great if what you're doing is studying something that is, in fact, objective. It's an object. It exists from a materialist point of view in the physical domain. It's something you can hold, you can measure, and it is a phenomenal study, but it has its limits. Because if you don't state this question properly, you can't get at the solution. And another brilliant American philosopher named Thomas Nagel articulated this so brilliantly that the first time I read this articulation, I was just stunned. I just thought it was so beautiful. So Nagel writes an article for the Philosophical Review, one of these peer-reviewed publications, called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" You want to get somebody's attention in one of these dry journals, call an article, "What is it like to be a bat?" And you've got people's attention, because he got my attention. And in this thing, he literally tackles that problem. You cannot solve, or as they say in philosophy, reduce any kind of problem to a solution if you don't properly state the problem. And properly stating the problem means including every aspect of what it is you're trying to define. And if you leave the subjective out, which is an intrinsic aspect of this consciousness thing we're talking about, you haven't properly stated the problem. So he could have stopped right there, and he has me.
We're talking about consciousness. Mm-hmm. The first thing that you did is you defined consciousness with knowing, the Latin roots.
Yes.
Then you went into, let's explore it from a philosophical perspective.
Yes.
Philosophy is actually going into the Greek roots, loving of wisdom. Right?
Yes.
So you go, okay, let's fuse these two. Let's take an approach that has some knowledge to it, an approach that has some wisdom to it.
Perfect.
So that we can sort of start to understand this.
Yeah.
You then defined it as it's the subjective experience of being anything.
Anything.
And that can go in, talk about focus, we can take this down to the micro all the way up to the macro, the subjective experience of being that. Then you started to say, okay, well, if we're going to go into philosophy, let's look at the guys who have really done a great job so far at explaining this.
Yes.
Let's start with David Chalmers,
Yes.
Australian lad, and said basically, if you're going to define something scientifically, you have to do it in the third person objectively. Anything that exists in the physical domain, and I don't know if this is how Chalmers set up his sort of arguments,
No,
but this is
right
where
on.
you're going. The difficulty here is that you're trying to take an objective approach and reduce something. However, if you reduce it, you're going to leave out the subjective experience, and the subjective experience is part of the definition. So how do we even define the problem that we're trying to solve?
Yes.
Otherwise, we're just going to stump ourselves or, nail one foot to the ground and just end up going in circles.
Yes. In a purely Western traditionally Western scientific way. Remember, it's totally focused on the objective point of view. It's looking for objective truth, and God love it because that rigor has served us miraculously in the physical domain.
Yeah.
And by the way, it was David Chalmers who coined that term, by the way, the hard problem.
Gotcha.
Because he's like scratching his head going, how are you possibly going to do this? It's apples and freight trains, and you're trying to define this thing over here as if it's an apple. What kind of an apple is a freight train? It's like, that's going to be a challenge. So, yeah.
Okay, so I'm up to good speed. I feel still a little bit insecure with now Chalmers came in because you brought him up because he sort of coined the definition of, he coined the hard problem of consciousness.
Yes.
So that's why you introduced him.
Sure.
And then you introduced Nagel with what's it like to be a bat.
Yes.
Which is basically like, that's a completely different subjective experience.
That's right.
What's that like?
And
How
this
are we meant to know?
is why taking the time, putting on your crash helmet and going for this little bit more of a ride, you will really begin to grasp consciousness in a new way.
Love this.
And I hate when people talk down to an audience. They assume an audience can't keep up. I assume our audience can not only keep up, but they will fly with this. So I'm just going to shoot straight at it.
Yeah, I'm just going to take the angle of talking up to the audience
Yeah,
every
yeah.
time because
I mean, who am I, right?
There's a lot of information
That's
there,
right.
Jim, and
Okay.
you deliver it so well. And there's always a part of my mind that's like very impressed. That's just like, wow, that's a completely linear thought. But I don't understand any of it, though.
Stop me anytime that happens, because I assure you somebody else is doing the same thing. I'm just doing the best I can to put socks on an octopus. I mean, it's a challenging thing, okay? So then Thomas Nagel goes on to make the most beautiful metaphor/analogy, because he chooses a bat. He chooses a bat, because it is familiar enough to us humans that we can kind of relate to it. It's a warm-blooded mammal. It's got eyes, it's got ears, it's got a nervous system. But the subjective experience of being a bat is so alien to us that we have to create really stretched analogies in order to get any idea of what that's like. So he chose that because it's just alien enough so we get this idea. Because these bats have this sonar system. It's called echolocation. These bats are creating sounds, high-pitched frequencies that have all kinds of subtle nuance to them. Tonal nuance, timbre nuance, all these sound qualities, most of which we can't even hear. And they're sending these signals out into the world, and just like submarine sonar, that sound comes back to their huge bat ears. They're like big antenna. And they're able to discern from that echo objects, size of objects, position, quality of movement, vectors, even texture. We can't even conceive of doing that. They are getting at least as good a representation of their environment from the audio space as we get from the visual space. All we can do is sort of map that onto our visual experience, but it's a terrible representation. Or we can say something like, well, if you close your eyes and snap your fingers, you can kind of hear the different sounds. Yeah. The best we can say is somebody who's been blind from birth has developed a pretty good auditory sense. But it's nothing like what it's like to be a bat. So you've got that.
Yes.
So whatever it's like to be a bat, if it's like anything at all, that is consciousness, the subjective experience of that bat. So we get that idea, and now it's time to go deeper. So let me stop. Does that idea make sense at that level?
Yeah, and I just want to dig in a little bit deeper here, because what you're saying is that we could get confused with our senses being our subjective experience.
Right.
However, when using the example and analogy of another animal that's close enough to us that we
Yes.
can kind of understand that it's having a similar experience, but it's different enough to cause some question.
Yeah, because it has a nervous system just like ours. So it's seeing, though not very well. It's hearing, it's feeling things, it's tasting things. It pretty well maps onto our experience, but it's still very alien to us.
Yeah, and so with understanding that it's having some type of experience, and understanding that the machinery that's creating the sensory experience, you know, the neural machinery,
Yeah.
isn't necessarily consciousness itself.
Right.
Because we can shut off one of our senses. For example, if you're born blind, you
Yeah.
don't have the visual sense.
right.
However, you can remap some of your brain to be
Yeah.
able to be more acutely aware of the auditory sense.
Yeah.
And so what you're getting at here is that, like, whatever it's like to be that is,
Yes.
if we use the senses as something where it's like two sides of an equation, we can cancel those out.
Yes.
But there's a beingness that's
Yes.
underneath that.
Yes.
Whatever that beingness is consciousness. Is
The
that
subjective experience of being, in this case, a bat. Okay? So he's chosen that so we can kind of get our footing. We've reached base camp on this mountain we're trying to scale. So you get that part. This is very important because we need to build on that. Then he says, now, I'm quite convinced that there are even more alien types of beings and even more alien types of consciousness. Types of beings, things, if you will, that are so foreign, so alien to us, that we can't even conceive of their existence, let alone understand how they're operating. But get this, whatever it's like to be them, whatever it's like for them to be them, that first person, okay, subjective experience, if there's anything at all that is like being them, they are conscious. So all of a sudden, you're not talking about any of these mechanisms. You're not caught up in the physical at all. If there is anything subjectively like being anything, it's conscious. And thanks for sticking with this, because without that piece, we're just going around in circles. I'm suggesting that there is a continuum of subjective experience from the most rudimentary, fundamental structures, quantum mechanical level structures, all the way up to the most infinitely large astrophysical structures, and even the entirety of the universe itself, that there is in fact a subjective experience, but it doesn't even remotely relate to the subjective experience we're having. But who said we're the map of everything in the universe? What happens when we don't understand that is not so much a statement of what is, but a statement about the limits of our ability to conceive of something. And what I'm suggesting is, whatever rudimentary subjective experience is occurring in the most fundamental particle. Go down as far as you want, label it however you want. Strings in string theory, superstring. Particles, quarks. Go down as far as you want. The quantum field itself. I'm suggesting there is a subjective experience, but at that level it is so rudimentary and fundamental that it almost defies our capacity to call it a subjective experience. Then that's on a continuum that goes all the way up to the entire universe itself, which if you just look at the word universe, uni, one, the universe cannot have an objective experience. It is subjective by very definition. So what I'm suggesting is the entire universe and everything in it is being, and consciousness is the subjective experience of being. Anything or anyone or any combination. But I'd like to suggest the quality and even perhaps the quantity of consciousness seems to be, directly or indirectly, proportional to the size, to the complexity, and the coherence of the system within which it's operating. Human beings are incredibly complex organisms. The experience of being a human being is dense and rich, multifaceted, and we tend to be very sort of provincial. Everything is about us. It's about me, because we know more about me than we do anything else in the universe. So we have a tendency to say things aren't conscious. It wasn't that long ago that medical doctors believed that fetuses didn't feel things. They're not conscious, they're fetuses. They haven't even been born yet. It wasn't that long, my lifetime, till their instrumentation got better and they saw that when you put a probe in there, this fetus is pulling away from it. So you mentioned some people even think, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but almost with an eye roll, that plants are conscious. I'd like to suggest most definitely plants are conscious. As botany continues to improve, they start realizing that these plants, these unconscious things that most people consider lumber that grow branches, are in fact communicating, quite sophisticated communication between tree to tree or plant to plant. It's a chemical communication, though. It's not like our communication. And unfortunately, that sort of difference creates two unhelpful extremes. Number one, they're not conscious because they're not like us. Number two, they're conscious, and so let's anthropomorphize them and make them little human plants. Let's Disneyfy the whole thing so the plants are kind of talking to one another and texting and laughing. They're communicating chemically. If a grazing animal or a particular predator insect starts doing something harmful to a tree, it will begin to send chemicals, because it can't get up and run away, that will tend to repel that. It will communicate throughout itself with these chemicals, but other trees in the surrounding forest will begin to do the same thing. I'd like to suggest that's pretty sophisticated unconsciousness. And just to make a point, most of our synapses are in fact chemical rather than electrical. Some are electrical, but it's mostly chemical communication, neuron to neuron to neuron. So again, I want to just stop here and put a pin in it, but you see where this consciousness thing can get very exciting, very interesting, and can really then, when we come back down with it to the human level, help us live practically better lives. Just by knowing a little bit more about it.
So you mentioned that the limits of our ability, like us defining what is conscious and what isn't, can be actually limited by our ability to
That's right.
really understand how something else could be conscious.
Yes.
And I think that I would like to build off of that and say that it might not be actually limited by the ability, but it might be also limited by the way that our wiring is just set up.
Brilliant.
Because you put this awareness into a human vessel.
Yes.
And it starts to take on some characteristics.
Yes.
And one of them is how sticky our awareness really is to being human.
That's right.
Right? Because I go to sleep every night and I trip balls, you know, I change shape, the rules change in these different universe, you know,
That's right.
like the dream world is just completely different, and
Yes.
there are no sort of strict rules. And then as soon as I wake up, give it 4 minutes, the story of Henry Mitchell is kicked up, and it's so enthralling that I forget all of what has just happened. I forget that my consciousness has just kind of decoupled from this outline in this form.
That's right.
So quickly, right? Then the illusion that spun up that I am separate, that I am special, and that this is my story is so strong that it makes it difficult to think that anything else could even have something different to that. It's like, so it seems
It's insane what just happened 4 minutes ago. That can't have happened. That's insane. But it did.
But it did. So then you get to this dichotomy or dichotomous way of thinking where either nothing is conscious because only I can be conscious,
Right.
or everything is conscious but only the way that I can be conscious.
Exactly.
And, you know, let's draw a smiley face on the tree and make a movie out of it.
Yeah.
And so why is it that our wiring evolved to be so sticky, to really take our awareness and make this human experience for the brief amount of time that we're actually on this planet, make this human experience of being you so damn captivating?
So for that, let's go to another way of knowing. Not the Western objective way of knowing, because we've got that down. Let's go to, generally speaking, a more Eastern way of knowing. So in that sense, I'm going to call it an Eastern science, desire to know. But instead of exploring the objective physical domain, this is a series of cultures that decide to explore inward subjective domain. What has come to be called a spiritual domain. I wish they'd stop using that word because it's confusing the issue. And I'd like to suggest that for thousands of years they've been doing that, and they have created brilliant, very rigorous practices to enable that to occur. And in so doing, one of the things they've realized, and I'm suggesting this is something we can experiment with. We don't have to listen to somebody talking about it. Awareness has some key characteristics that are crucial to understand. Awareness tends to lose itself in the object of awareness, the experience. Okay? And I'm suggesting that if it didn't do that, it couldn't have the experience. That's how intrinsic it is to awareness. When it loses itself in the experience, it tends to lose itself most in the most distracting, the most attractive, the most interesting, the most captivating, the deepest, richest experiences. It gets lost. And let's do a thought experiment now to illustrate that you can do anytime. The metaphor that's used, the analogy that's used, it's like watching a good movie. You can test this. You're in a dark theater someplace, you're at home with family or friends, you're watching a flat screen. Light starts flickering on that screen. Artificial sound starts coming out of those speakers. Your awareness gets lost in that experience. For the next 90 minutes, 2 hours, that movie is your entire world. And if your awareness doesn't get lost in it, well, you're disappointed. You want your money back. It wasn't a very good movie. Notice how that works. Okay? Then just imagine somebody now has the technology to make what I'm going to call the real movie. Because all they're doing now is creating a kind of crappy 2D visual experience. Some fiddling with it technologically, but yeah. 2D. And you've got artificial sounds coming out of speakers. If you want to be really good, you can use headphones or surround sound. Imagine what's going to happen if they can tap into your kinesthetic sense in a movie. Okay? Just to start out now, and you're going to start seeing, if you know anything about movies, how challenging this would be to even make a film like this. But now, the hero of your action movie just takes an overhand right to the jaw. You don't go, ooh, good punch. You feel it. It's like, you're feeling it. And the bad guys take you and throw you off a 10-story building. You're not going, whoa. And mind you, people are freaking out in movie theaters now. People are injuring their knees and elbows because they're jumping in their seats over this. Imagine, now you're feeling it. Now imagine they're into your emotional life. They're tapping into your emotions. You're now feeling the full-on terror because you're heading right for the street at escape velocity. Your life is going to end. I don't even want to get into what that would be like when we get into the torrid love scenes, okay? But you talk about being lost in an experience. I'm telling you that if they get that and pray to everything holy that they don't, that you will never be able to get out of that movie unless some writer, director, producer says, okay, we're going to end it here. You won't be able to get out of it. That's what it is like for your awareness to be Henry Mitchell. The most absorbing thing possible. It has utterly identified with being this meat. And all the neurochemical, emotional experiences, that is, the subjective experience. Now, that may seem like, wow, okay, we're stuck. There's no way out. I'm suggesting there is. And anyone can do it. All you have to do is quiet your mind. I don't mean kind of sit and go and start talking to yourself. I mean quiet your mind. Get still and just watch what happens. This is what they've been doing in these Eastern cultures for millennia. Just shut up and watch, observe. And what you'll begin to notice is the me that is watching isn't this. because you're watching it. You stopped being in the experience. Me, Henry, enough about me. What do you think about me? You start moving out of that experience. Who the hell is you that's moving out of that experience? Who's watching? I'm suggesting who's watching is awareness. It's not all wrapped around the axle. It's not emotional. It's not flipping out. It's not ecstatic. It's not attached, nor is it rejecting. It's simply there doing what it does. Having the experience. We can experiment with that right now, if you'd like.
I just want to recap everything that you just mentioned.
Thank you,
So,
because I get I get excited.
No, it's one of the thousands of reasons that I love you. So you mentioned how, basically my starting question is, why is it that consciousness gets stuck to the vessel so immediately,
Yes.
so urgently?
Yeah.
Because what it's like to be me is very immediate, very urgent, and it takes 4 minutes after waking up in the morning, most, for me to be really back in this.
Yes.
And so the way that you
I
answered
don't want to cut you off, but this is so important. What you're saying is so important. May I suggest that if anyone else were able to have the subjective experience of Henry Mitchell, it would be so alien to them they would flip the hell out. Because no one has had that experience but Henry Mitchell. Consciousness. So keep going, because you hit these points so beautifully. This is why I love you. So keep going, I promise. I'll shut up.
if I were to wake up in somebody else's body, it would be so foreign to me that I would freak out. Mm-hmm. That sounds like a Freaky Friday or some kind of like Disney Channel movie.
I'm sure they're working
on it.
But like
actually, it really would be.
Yeah.
And it's only because I've grown up and been so familiar and seen every day as fetal Henry all the way up to Henry now that I expect it.
Yeah.
However, you use the analogy that my consciousness is like a very, very, very good movie that I'm completely plugged into. And if we were to...
The experience of your consciousness is like watching a good movie. It's not your consciousness.
Yes.
It's getting lost in that experience. Yeah.
Gotcha. And then so if you went on a tangent to basically say that if we were to, as a species, which I believe that we will very soon with either Neuralink or some type of augmented reality, basically be able to simulate the nervous system in general to not just the visual and the auditory experience, but really get the full flavor of what it is to be you in a completely different scenario, then we would then be at the complete mercy of a director or anybody that seems to be putting this all on, which sounds like a Black Mirror episode pretty quickly.
Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it?
No.
Kind of like, 900 mics of acid. Sounds like a good idea till you do it. Anyway,
so with that being said, you then mentioned that when looking into the Eastern philosophy, Eastern science, so the love of knowledge, they're really taking more of a subjective, rigorous approach to being human instead of an objective, rigorous approach, which is a bit more on the Western side. With the Eastern side being far more subjective, then exploring the inner consciousness through practices, you can actually find that there's a way to decouple your awareness from the object of experience.
Brilliant.
And that's what we're about to do right now.
Yeah.
Love that.
Brilliant. So because you and I have done some work getting still, I'm going to shift this a little bit so it doesn't take as much time, but I highly encourage everyone at home watching this to do this as well. And please just do it. Don't think about it. Okay? As always, first, belly first, inhale through the nose. Okay? Slow inhale. Hold that breath. And very slowly, let that breath just trickle out through your throat and your mouth. Slower. Just a trickle. Ride that long exhale down. Your body's quieting now. It's relaxing. Okay? Then another slower, deeper, belly first. Inhale through the nose. Hold that breath. And even more slowly, let that breath just trickle out through the throat and the mouth. Almost watch it like a feather drifting down to the ground. Your emotions calming down now. Because we're right here. Okay? And one final, slowest, deepest breath of all. In through the nose. Hold that breath. And we hold it a little longer. And then even more slowly, let that breath just trickle out. Throat and mouth. As the mind begins to quiet, calm. Okay? Now, without asking how, without asking why, just stop the words in your mind. Stop them. Very slowly begin to come back to what used to be normal waking consciousness. And as you do, notice the difference. There isn't just one kind of consciousness. And as you come back, before those words and thoughts start up again, because there is a mechanism in there that's trying to boot this all back up because you have needs. Forget those needs just for a minute and just tell me, what is this experience like? What does this experience look like to you now?
What does it look like?
Yeah. Any difference in the way you're perceiving visually?
Oh, absolutely. You're changing shapes. The lights around you are moving. There's purples and blacks going over your face and coming back up.
Yeah.
You're sort of like your outlines coming in and out of focus. You're aging.
Yeah.
And
that interesting?
Yeah. You look about 10 years older and your features are different.
Yes.
You're still you.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, now it's just your eyes.
Good. Stop the words. You see, now you're actually having the conscious experience. It's not being filtered through some kind of inner narrative. So come on back now, completely, all the way back. Now this is normal consciousness. That's what that feels like. Now look around the room and tell me, do you notice anything different about the intensity of colors or shapes? I don't want to suggest anything to you. Just, if you don't, tell me.
Not so much the intensity. Everything just looks fresh.
Okay, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Because you're seeing it. You're not seeing an internal representation of it that your mind is chattering about. That's consciousness. That's awareness. As soon as that awareness gets mediated by this internal chatter, well, that's what it's experiencing. I'd like to suggest that we human beings experience the world, and most of us have learned to take that experience, that sensory experience, make symbols out of it in our minds, and then we live in our minds. Do you really need a color commentator in your mind describing your experience to you all day long? No. Because it's going on. I'm sitting here looking at Jim. Look at Jim. Jim looks like an idiot. I mean, do you really need someone in there with you telling you what it is you're experiencing? You're experiencing it. It's a habit. But if we can stop those words, then if we can stop all the other distractions, what remains is this awareness.
Okay, I just had a thought, and I want you to let me know how off target it feels. So if we go back to the bat example, and the bat's using echolocation to basically understand its whole environment, right? You would imagine that to be that bat, to be aware like that bat, you would be hearing a lot of stuff all of the time.
Yes.
And then similar to the parallel where it's like you mentioned that humans using our visual sense, that's sort of how we navigate the world, right? Because we're primarily visually based.
Yes.
The occipital lobe takes up what 25% of our the brain's neural energy at any point. So we're really focused visually, and that's been incredibly helpful. If we take this back to our conversation on status, to understand and hunt well with others and other groups, because we can use our eyes as we've got the whites around our eyes to be able to direct silently what we're looking at to help us basically move together and hunt more effectively. Now, you mentioned how incredibly alluring it is to be constantly listening to the narrator in our minds. And that narrator is consistently representing the world into symbols.
Yes.
Now, those symbols are incredibly useful because if we go back to status, it's like that's stabilizing groups that are millions of, or even billions of people around the world.
Brilliant.
So it's like, of course, we are similar to how the bat's always bloody listening.
Yes.
Because that's how it's surviving.
Yeah.
It's like we're always bloody listening to that narrative and representing. Because if we weren't able to do that, we wouldn't be able to cooperate with each other.
Brilliant.
And that's the reason we're alive.
Brilliant.
And so that's like, of course we got to be doing this all of the bloody time. You wake up and you start like tripping out and seeing how fresh the world is. You're going to get picked off in no time.
That's exactly right. So you've hit the why part. What I'm suggesting is, do you need to do that 24/7? When it's safe and we won't get picked off, what if we were to stop that for 5 minutes? That's all. That's the beauty of this. See, nothing I'm saying is we shouldn't be doing this. You've explained brilliantly why we do it and why we should continue to do it. But as Groucho Marx said, I love my cigar, but I take it out of my mouth every once in a while. That's kind of the point here. And I'm just suggesting that process of stopping that periodically can radically improve the life you have when you go right back into it again.
Two directions that I want to take this.
Good.
And you're getting me really excited. So the first one's more of just a story from my own experience about how practical this can actually be. Because I went to the dentist the other day and I had a lunch with a good friend right after the dentist, and the dentist tells me like, oh, we're going to have to give you a filling. And I was like, great. And they're like, okay, so you just have to sign this paperwork for the Novocaine. And I'm like, how long does the Novocaine last? And they're like, well, 3 hours. I'm like, yeah, but I've got a lunch. And I'm very food oriented if you haven't picked up this already.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, do I have to do the Novocaine? And
Brilliant.
They're like, no, you don't have to. And I'm like, okay, well, if I need it, I'll let you know. And I'll tap on your arm or something like that. And the guy's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay, I feel like I should be filming this for TikTok. And I'm like, no, don't do that. But let's see how it goes. And sure enough, like they just get the drills out. And I went into that space that we were just in.
There you go.
And I was observing what it was like to be me. And don't get me wrong, like I I could absolutely feel the drills going into my teeth and
Yes.
the whining and the discomfort.
Yes.
And the nerve tickling. I don't know if tickling's the right verb here, but like,
Depends on where your consciousness is.
Exactly.
Congratulations.
but it was at a distance. And so that to me was like just another reason to triple down on this practice.
Yes.
Because the guy asked me afterwards, he was like, well, why do you do that? I'm like, well, honestly, you're not going to get this. This is going to sound really out of left field, but like, I'm training, you know, because I know that I'm going to go through a lot of pain in my life. Nobody gets out of this pain free, right? Like, there's going to be moments, and this is emotional pain, this is physical pain, this is whatever. But if I can collect as much data as possible that I am not my body, my feeling, my emotions, the story, the narrative that's going on in my mind, then I will have the keys to my own prison. You know, I can open the door and go out. And so, you know, I sort of said that to him, and the guy's looking at me like, you're a psychopath.
Yeah. You need Novocaine. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like,
No, but
you
that's
should go
brilliant.
back to that prison that
That's
you're talking
brilliant.
about getting out of.
That's brilliant. So I had not one, but 2 clients who had open heart surgery, different times. And they were just equipped with this capacity, this skill. And it's a skill. Anybody can learn it. They were able to get their state so quiet, so calm, that on the day of their surgery, the anesthesiologist was mad at them because they thought they were high. You're not supposed to get high before you do anesthetics. One of them set a kind of record at Cedars Hospital for the shortest amount of time post-op in CC, critical care, right? Then the healing process was baffling to their doctors. Only statistically, because they weren't so tight that the trauma of having your chest opened up like a tin can was nothing like it would be if you were resisting that, even at a subconscious level. Those are some of the benefits of this. And to this day, I get feedback from these people because it's amazing what they did. It's not me, it's them. Because pain, seriously, is a process in your mind. It is the process of recording these neural impulses and having an experience in certain regions of your brain that are there for your self-preservation. Once it doesn't serve you anymore, it's very helpful to be able to dial it down.
Okay, so I just want to really demystify this.
Sure.
Because the last thing I would want to happen is for somebody to be watching or listening to this, and then to be like, wow, Jim is some sort of magician.
No.
Because that's not the case here. Let's
No.
really like break this down as to why those records could have been broken in the first place.
Yes.
If you are quieting your mind
Yes.
and quieting that story-making process,
Yes.
you aren't making those stories up.
Yes.
Those stories are intrinsically tied to your emotions and
Yes.
what you bring up with that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If you're quieting that story down, lowering your heart rate, expanding and completely relaxing, somebody then goes in to do open heart rate surgery, sews you all back up. The thing that could prolong your recovery, the stories that you're making up about it, the stress-induced states of mind that you're then constricting around.
Yes, literally repelling what they're doing. You're resisting instead of just letting go. Yeah.
And if you're open and responsive, like one of the modules that we do, you literally talk about this when we talk about awareness, but it's like, this isn't some expanding woo-woo. No, you're literally like relaxing your blood vessels. You're letting nutrients go around your body more effectively. Like it's completely practical to the level where it's like, it's a practice that's actually having applicable effect. It isn't like just pointing a finger at some mysterious, magical, like pixie dust.
Not parlor tricks.
It's not a parlor trick, no. Although that's, I'm pretty sure if there anybody on this earth that I would want to do a couple of parlor tricks, I would get you to do them. But
you're right on. And just to be clear, These two clients had anesthesia. They weren't doing a Henry. They weren't saying, yeah, cut me up. I don't need any. No.
Well, this is a tooth and not my heart.
No,
so,
but
like,
what I'm
let's make
saying
that
is,
difference
just to be
too.
clear, they were having anesthesia, just nowhere near as much as they would have had to have if they hadn't done this state control prior to. Anesthesia is just state control. It's just chemical.
After your clients come out of this,
Yeah.
they pick up the phone, they call you. What do they say?
Holy shit, you were right. Guess what? And I'm just delighted. I'm thrilled because what that means is they did it. Yeah. I can talk till I'm blue in the face. I can show them techniques, but if they don't do them, it takes courage to do them. But I must tell you, part of our work was we got into very deep, very, very receptive states, and we went through the process of surgery 10, 15, 20 times. So this was very familiar to their bodies. I'm just suggesting that this incredibly plastic brain of ours, neuroplastic brain of ours, adapts quickly. It has to. It's got to survive.
The other direction that I wanted to take this is just before we started to get still, you said, stop the words in your mind, don't think.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to lead the witness at all in terms of put words in your mouth, but do you remember the first time that we got still together?
I think I do.
Do you think, would you have classified me as a natural?
No, you were fighting it.
Tell me more about that.
Who you are, part of what makes you who you are, part of what makes you so valuable is you refused to stop this objective third-person phenomenon. You wanted to study this. As badly as you wanted to get still, you wanted to observe the process as it was happening more. It wasn't until you were able to let that go. And by the way, I consider that a heroic journey. Because to go against something so intrinsic to who you are, you're a real scientist, not somebody who's playing one at school. You really want to know. But I'm suggesting part of this is in a way impeded by the inability to stop thinking thoughts about what's happening. Because you're always a thought away from what's happening. That's the problem with a scientific approach. As incredible as it is an objective point of view. And as long as we're talking physical objects in the physical domain, God, is it good. Gets us to the moon. But it won't get us where we're trying to go if what we're trying to do is get consciousness. And there are some hardcore physicists out there who are really doing a yeoman's job here. A guy named Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have come up with a brilliant theory about how consciousness might evolve out of physical structures. But Penrose met Hameroff because Penrose said, I don't think this could ever be explained, what it is, through physics. And Hameroff then takes issue and says, yeah, but you don't know what microtubules are. I don't want to get off into the tech, but these little microtubules inside of nerve cells, he's a neuroscientist. He works with anesthetic, and that's how anesthesia works, through these little microtubules, these latticed polymer, proteins in tubulin. It's a protein. And so together they come up with this theory called OR, Orchestrated Objective Reduction. Pursue it yourself. I don't want to eat up a lot of time. But desperately trying to explain, unfortunately, still in an objective way, They've gone even farther down into how it manages to emerge, but they haven't been able to say what it is. And that's what, Roger Penrose is brilliant. The guy's in his 90s and sounds like a 30-year-old. He's enough of a scientist to say, I don't know if we can. I don't know if we're equipped in pure physics. And he did what I'm suggesting we all need to do. Extend the range, as they say, into these other fields. It'll help inform you. And that's exactly what he did. It's brilliant. I don't mean to wander off, but this is really important.
No, it is. And I want to extend the range into the field of, back into sort of the more Eastern and subjective exploration.
Yes.
Because you also mentioned if we really want to reduce our suffering and increase our well-being, this is the way out.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make a connection and have you either validate it, build upon it, or completely just sort of throw it away, where basically so much of our suffering is rooted in the story that we're telling ourselves, that when we can quiet down that narrative, the emotional states often go with it. And if you hold a incredibly still and open, expansive state of mind for long enough, the feeling state that comes with that is one of awe and peace and just wonder with the world. And this is what all of the mystics were sort of talking to all of the time. It's like, just quiet let the mud settle, and then, all of this. Right. And so when you mention that, stop thinking, don't let the storytelling sort of keep going, your suffering will start to abide, and you'll start to just be aware. Your consciousness will just be conscious of consciousness, which is kind of a weird sort of place to get to. But at that point, when you start to then cook the stories back up, how are you meant to put that experience into the story that it's then like feeding itself into, if that makes sense?
So let me get back to something we talk about frequently, but these different contexts help us to see it. I'm suggesting that not only are there more than just one kind of consciousness, there are multiple scopes of context, and that the scope of your context is everything. And I'm going to suggest that the most macro, the farther back, and the most expansive scope of context, the macro, is where you'll find this peace. The more you drop down into the micro, you're going to find more and more of the juice that is so sticky and so much fun about being a human being or anything else. I'm suggesting that Western minds go to, okay, well, which one is better? It's like, no. Our job is to learn how to navigate through the infinite, discrete movements from one scope to the other, and go where you most want to be. What's the optimal scope of context? What we did when we started this discussion, we went way up here in this very, very macro to get the overall picture. Then we climbed right down into the specifics. We navigated. This is something you're getting really good at, and I hope everyone does when they realize they can do this. If you're at the scope of context of your day-to-day life and you're having a problem, I'm suggesting that you will not be able to solve that problem at the level of the problem. It's only when you expand the scope of context, get some more perspective, more expansive, that you start to see solutions. If you continue to do that, expand the scope of context, you most likely will arrive at a point where you realize that's not even a problem. But at the level of the problem, your awareness is lost at that scope of context, that experience. The world's going to end. That's what awareness is doing. It is having that experience. I don't mean to get cute and woo-woo, but it's enjoying the game. The world's going to end if my team doesn't make a point within the next 30 seconds. Well, I guess it's not going to end, but boy, did that feel juicy. See, I'd like to suggest that up here is where the vision, what is possible to do. Down here is the doing. And the doing has certain characteristics. Up here, I can see the whole thing plan, but I'm not doing anything. The being part up here, the doing part down here. That scope, that range of context is what we need to learn in what I'm calling practical spirituality. These CEOs that I get the privilege of working with have gotten better and better and better at doing that. I had a session yesterday that was just delicious with one of these people. Because here's this problem, and it's like, man, this could torpedo the whole company. And it's like, yeah, I'm kind of going along. Yeah, this could be bad. And then we slowly just expand the scope of context until finally they're, well, yeah, but I guess it really wouldn't, because if we do that, then I'm just going, yeah, good job. I didn't do that. They did that. But they learned how to navigate these different scopes of context. The farther down into the micro you get, the more juice, the more drama, but potentially the more suffering. The farther up into the macro you get, the less drama, the less juice, the less suffering, the more peace. But there's no drama. It's just peaceful. I'm suggesting that our job is to remember wholeness, completeness, balance. It's not one or the other.
I want to stop you right there because I think that one of the most important things that you mentioned, but I really want to underline, bold, highlight, and exclamation point next to it is you have to do this. You have to practice it consciously.
Yes.
You have to make an intention
Yes.
in order to be able to navigate.
Yes.
Because if you don't do the reps, if you don't get still or get quiet or meditate or
Yes.
whatever you want to call
Whatever it is.
if you don't do that daily,
Yes.
then you will get caught in the juice.
You're lost in the experience.
You're lost.
Yep.
You're completely lost,
Yes.
and you won't have it when you need it.
Yes.
And this isn't some different type of angle where it's like, actually you should use it as a preventative type of
Yeah,
method. It's like,
no.
just practice it. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
You just have to give the story making sort of machinery a good enough story as to why to practice that.
Yeah.
And, loop it onto, you have to give it meaning. Oh, I'm doing this for my kids. I'm doing this for my wife. I'm doing this for whomever it is. If it's not yourself, ultimately, if you can do it for yourself, that's great. But you need to practice it every day.
Yeah.
Because I know what it's like to not practice it every day. And I've seen what it's like for people that have used to practice every day and then don't.
Yes.
And then come to me and be like, wow, I forgot that. And it's like, yeah, we all do, but don't.
Yeah. I would be a basket case if I didn't do this all day, every day. And I'd like to suggest a simple practice. The simple practice, decide, pick a day, Sunday, something not so complicated. Sunday, you got a day off if you do, and just take 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Find a place, get quiet, and just stop the words. Just stop the words for 5 minutes. You won't turn into a pumpkin. It's okay. And just notice. First, there are going to be all kinds of words. Well, I could stop the words if I wanted to, but why should I read it? And that state that you begin to notice isn't quite as weird as you thought it would be. That state begins to build momentum, and then it gets easier and easier to stop the words. And then you realize when you go outside, I'm not saying, wow, it's a beautiful day here today in Venice. Wow, look at that. Look at the birds. The clouds are really high. The smog's not so much. I'm not labeling everything. That's not the sky. It's just this incredible experience. And if I'm lucky, if I've been practicing, I don't jump in and go, God, this works. It's so cool. And here's a promise. You're going to realize why these people go on silent retreats. Because the world that we're living in doesn't want to do that. It's very tough to be wordless when someone's going, okay, so Henry, by the way, tell me what the thing is and where's the Freema shack. You kind of have to get back into the world of words. I do that for about 2 hours every morning. It's part of my stillness routine. But I'm very conscious, and my poor wife, God love her, puts up with that final hour because I'm downstairs doing what I'm doing. By this time, I start pretty early. And she knows, don't talk to the goofball for another hour, and then it'll be okay. I mean, I'm having meals I've never had before because it's just like, wow.
I know exactly what you're saying, and this goes back to the tug of war that we have most episodes. How are you doing? I'm the luckiest guy in the world.
Yeah.
Because not having that preferential filter set, as you like to refer to it as, and seeing something for the first time like it's the first time is so bloody miraculous.
Yes.
And then the thing that really blows my mind is you then superimpose the luck and circumstances of what it is to be in like this vessel.
You
know, because what is it like to be a bat? I don't really want to find out,
you
know, because I kind of like being a human in this world.
Yes.
You know, it's like that. You start to appreciate these things that are just, that we overlook all of the time because they're just a part of every day.
Yes.
And when that starts to get undone, you just get this feeling of, oh my God, how is it that I get to be aware of this again today? And that to me started off, it gave me a feeling of guilt for a while. Mm-hmm. But that guilt then transitioned very smoothly into duty, where it's like, talk about how this folds back into meaning. Saying thank you for that circumstance of your life and asking the objective. You know, like I ask the objective awareness, not the subjective Henry.
Sure.
Oh, Henry, what's your wish list? What do you want for Christmas? It's like, no, how can I say thank you for this?
Yeah.
And sure enough, I don't know how, and I don't ask why anymore, but sure enough, clues are presented throughout my day, which has actually led us to these conversations that we've been having in terms of like, what's the most elegant way for me to say thank you? And sure enough, when trying to maintain that pocket of humility, it gives me everything that I need and helps me to remove everything that I thought I needed but was actually a hidden desire. And that just becomes such a smooth way of living. So I know exactly what you're saying when you wake up in the morning and you look around and you're like, holy shit, I've never had this meal. Or it's like, I don't know why I get to do this again. That feeling is a different baseline. And that to me is just, it's the reason that I have to practice every day. It is, no, I need to do this because otherwise I get wrapped up in my bullshit. Otherwise I get wrapped up in like why the world sucks to be me today. And it's like, that's not that fun to be conscious of, you know? I was having a great conversation with a great friend of mine last night, and his family's house has just been absolutely destroyed by the hurricane in Florida. So he's going by his childhood home, all of this, and it's like 4 foot of water and the piano's floating type deal. And we get through talking about how just awful it was. And at the end of the conversation, we just made a bet with each other where it's like, okay, anytime in the next 30 days that one of us complains, we've got to text each other.
Good for you.
And sure enough, that was like, it already worked so well because this morning,
Why?
well, it reframed everything. This morning, I wake up, I go downstairs to get a nice cold glass of water because I'm parched.
Yes.
And I open my cupboard, and sure enough, out falls an 8-ounce glass, smashes all over the floor. It's like 4:30 in the bloody morning. There's glass everywhere. And I'm about to complain, and I just start laughing. I'm like, I can't.
Why?
I couldn't
Values. Why? This is one of those moments. What's more important, the glass or your status with your friend?
complain. My status with my friend.
Brilliant.
And more
And
importantly to that,
it's great.
it's a great story.
Yes.
You know, and it's like, I'm a storytelling animal.
Yes.
You know, and it was just like, wow, this is awesome. You know, the best bit is, going back to consciousness, it's like, I have flagged something that has been, I can't tell you how many times I complained during the day because I don't have the tally out. Now I've got the tally out. I'm really conscious of it, and it's like, I don't want to text the fucker.
Yes.
I don't want to be like, I complained again.
Yes.
Because we don't really have all that much to justifiably complain about.
But look at how all of this, including your current values, are serving you now. The very thing that you might have thought was, oh, I've got to worry about this, is literally making your life better, because the complaining isn't helping anybody. This is what I mean about practical spirituality. Use this stuff. It's brilliant.
Oh, and I love this conversation because I can already like change the scope of my consciousness and realize that there's a tiny little piece of glass in my foot.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Do I want that to be the object of my awareness?
Exactly.
Nope, I need to speak to Jim.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, should I try and get the glass? Can I get the glass out without the camera noticing?
As in, people on the other side of the world right now are being carried on broken stretchers, and there isn't any blood to transfuse, and they've got a gaping hole. And it's like, oh, I've got a sliver of glass. Now, some people would really balk at that and say, well, then that means I can never complain. Yep. Or, okay, if you'd rather complain, do it, but at least put it in context.
We're getting into some really cool territory.
Good.
And I kind of want to take this to a little bit more of a... I kind of want to take this to a little bit more of a dreamy place.
Okay.
Right? Because I've been getting more and more interested in just dreams in general and what they mean. And one of the great guys to really look up to here is Carl Jung. Mm-hmm. And he says, if you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an incredible quotation because of the journey that I've had with stillness and introspection. It feels like a progressive nature of making something that was previously unconscious, conscious, wrestling with it, redirecting it, putting it back down into a place, we were talking about values earlier, into a place that feels better for who I am and what I want to be in the world. And I think that that's a really cool place to start because we like to make this division between conscious and unconscious. But I'm curious, do you think that it feels like we can move that baseline quite whenever we want to, if we intend to do so? And then also, I'm curious as to how you think about these different modalities that are out there that change your consciousness, because there's like, you can get into hypnotic states and hypnagogic states and like all of these different states of consciousness. And I'm just giving you the most wide open, expansive question I think I possibly can in terms of saying like, what do you think about all of that?
Well, first, this idea of conscious, subconscious. I'd like to suggest that we use a term now that I'm just making up, I have used a lot, but I don't know. And that's normal waking consciousness. Very specific kind of consciousness. I'd like to suggest that there are actually measurable indicators of these different kinds of consciousness, starting with normal waking consciousness. One of those metrics is what they refer to in neuroscience as brainwave frequencies. When the brain does what it does, it generates certain frequencies in the electrochemical, electromagnetic frequency range, and they're measurable. They're very, very slight, but they're measurable with what we call an electroencephalograph. It's a device that places electrodes over the brain. And the frequencies aren't causing these states, they're a signature of the state. So we got to be very clear. It's not the frequencies that are making these states change. When the states change, the frequencies change. Normal waking consciousness, or what they call beta, they use Greek letters to describe it, about 17 to 34, 40 hertz or beats per second. That's a very slow frequency. You can't possibly hear that, just to let you know, and you sure as hell can't see it. Just below that, we have what's called alpha. Why they didn't put these in order, I don't know. It has nothing to do with the order of the Greek alphabet. Alpha frequencies, 7 to 17 hertz, beats per second. You go into alpha, and you are starting to quiet down. You're starting to go inward just a bit. I'm describing it subjectively. It's a light meditative state. And every time you go in it, if you have one of these electroencephalographs on, it will register the frequencies are dropping. You drop down even deeper than that, you go into what's called theta. Okay? Theta. 4 hertz to 7 hertz. Theta is where we're talking about stillness. Deep, deep meditative state. Still aware of what's going on out here, but boy, is it dialed down. You don't need to be distracted. You are able to be distracted if it's important. You're not unconscious. But you drop down even further, what they call delta. 0.4, that's not even a full cycle per second. That's how slow that is. 0.4 to 4 hertz. One of the signatures of being in this delta state, by the way, all of these states you go through in a normal night's sleep, what they call the circadian rhythm. Okay? One of the signatures of this delta state is amnesia when you come out. Now, isn't that an interesting thing? Because given how we started this piece of our conversation, when you say, I went to sleep, I was unconscious, that's not an accurate description because your brain is cooking the whole time. You go to sleep and you drop into different kinds of consciousness. And I'm suggesting that as you go in there and you start hallucinating in these lower brainwave states, they're not normal waking consciousness. You experience different things. Your eyes are tracking. They call it REM sleep, rapid eye movement, because your eyes are moving. What are they moving? What are they looking at? Your eyes are closed. It's all internal. And there are almost no limits to what your mind can create in that state. You drop all the way down, you're going into this sort of dreamless state. You're not dreaming anymore, but your brain is still cooking. It's just not cooking in the same way, and you don't remember it. I'm suggesting that right now, I don't do this stuff anymore, but right now, we could induce a state in you of delta wavelength consciousness. Okay? We could induce that. It would take a while, but we'd get there. In that state, you're quite conscious because I'm going to be talking to you, and you and I will agree that when I take my hand and I rub my earlobe like this, you are going to wave your hand at me. We agree on that. We reinforce that several times. Then we bring you back up to normal waking consciousness. Okay? And guess what? Remember the signature of that delta frequency. You don't remember anything that just happened. So you and I are talking, everybody's watching, and I do this, and you wave. Your mind thinks several thoughts, because you're Henry, you think, shit, what are people going to think? Why am I waving? Your brain will make up a story because it's got to figure out what's going on, and it doesn't know what's going on because it's now in conscious, waking state. Okay? It's no longer in this delta state. So you reach up and you kind of rub your shoulder because I worked out hard today, and that's why I'm waving. Your so-called conscious mind, normal waking conscious, has no idea why you just did that. Then you put the arm down, we keep talking, then I do this again, and you wave again. Same thing, only this time it's like, it's getting kind of chilly in here. I think I'll put my coat on. I used to do this as a demonstration of these states. And the thing that's interesting, if we then induce that state again, of delta, you'll remember it all. Consciousness is a state-bound phenomenon. Whatever state you're in is radically affecting the experience you're having, this subjective experience of being. So I want to say something that I don't normally say in this sort of tone, but your state of awareness is more important than anything else in your world. Anything, period, by 10 miles. Your state of awareness is how you know anything about your world, including your place in it, who you think you are at any given time, how you're doing, what you're doing, and why. Your state of awareness is far more important than anything else you think you need to be doing while you're in a less than optimal state. Because that less than optimal state is the problem. So just to put this in the context of practical, day-to-day, rubber meets the road, that's a very important thing to know. Then it's very important to know how to change that state. And that's what we're all about. That's what stillness and the practice of stillness is all about. To be able to get in there, first recognize I'm in a state that's less than optimal because it has momentum. It doesn't want to change. Then being able to get quiet enough that that state does in fact change. On command, if I practice enough, and I will continue to get better and better and better at this forever if I keep practicing. And then, if I'm in an optimal state for whatever I'm doing, if being completely wrapped around the axle over some problem is an optimal state for you at this point, I'll help you get there. I just want to make sure it's your choice. Your conscious choice as well as your subconscious choice.
I'm going to do my best
Sure.
to recap a lot of information, but
Yeah.
I'll do it as well as I can. So the question originated with, really we have this divide between conscious and subconscious.
Yeah.
And how do you really, comprehend that?
Yeah.
And you basically answer the question by saying we have actually a sliding scale of
You bet.
states.
You bet.
And we can they've done this before in EEG study, so electroencephalograph studying in neuroscience, where they're basically looking at the different frequencies that your brain emits.
Yes.
And they've put rough categories around that.
Yes.
The Greek doesn't have much to do with what's actually going
Just a
on, but
name.
you've got alpha, beta, delta, and theta. Not in that order.
Right.
It's alpha, beta, delta, theta.
Beta, alpha. Should be alpha, beta.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
beta, alpha, theta, and delta.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, delta is associated with deep sleep and amnesia. Theta you can tap into in deep states of stillness and meditation.
Yes.
Beta and alpha is kind of like waking awareness and relaxed waking awareness.
Relaxed and slightly meditative state, like you're kind of spacey.
Yeah.
Alpha.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. And so in your experience, you wanted to explore these different states because being sort of a psychonaut, you wanted to understand as much about volitional state
Sure.
change and state control.
Sure.
So you understood how you can get into these different states.
Yeah.
And then when seeing how behaviors change with people in delta,
Right.
the susceptibility and the amnesic
Yeah, that's it.
amnesic
Good.
states
Sure.
can be used to demonstrate that you can make an association and an agreement with somebody
Yes.
and they forget about it, yet they
Yeah.
continue to do it.
And you were not unconscious because it's in there.
Yeah, and that's like in the realm of hypnotism, and I believe that has such a bad name
Oh, I hate it.
today because of the potential and the abuse in terms of how that's been
Sure.
manipulated.
Sure.
So
And misrepresented, to be fair.
actually, I'm going to ask you about the root of the word, because I think I can get close to something with hypno and
Sure.
the delta wave,
Sure.
being associated with sleep. Anyway, what you were mentioning there is that with this sliding scale of state control, that there is an ability to understand that you can be conscious in all of it. It's just whether you want to direct your attention and your awareness to become
Yeah.
more conscious of it. And so this is a bridge to my next exploration that I wanted to go into, where I basically just wanted to ask you about, I had a very odd experience in a dream the other night.
Okay?
I wake up in my dream and I'm like, ooh, I'm awake. This is fun. Like, I don't want to get too excited because then I'll wake up. And I basically did the flying thing, did the surfing thing, and was like, okay, what do I actually want to do here? And so I asked my subconscious, my unconscious, whatever is making the dreamscape itself. I asked, what is it that I need to learn in this life? Like, what is it that I need to learn? And I start hearing an answer in my own voice, and that made me very skeptical. I'm like,
Good for
oh,
you.
yeah, okay, yeah,
Good.
I'm hearing this in my own voice.
Yeah.
And then I heard a woman's voice completely interrupt me and say, well, if I told you that, you wouldn't practice. And then I woke up. So my question here is like, I don't want to get too symbolic. I don't want to just anthropomorphize, and I don't want to get too sort of woo-woo and mystical.
Yeah.
But that dream had gave me a lot of excitement and a lot of meaning.
Sure.
Because it's like, wow, maybe there is something that's really looking out for me type thing. And so I just wanted to sort of ask, right, like, how much energy should I spend trying to interpret that? And should I just take the headline for what it is and continue practicing?
Well, it's a great question. And I've done a fair amount of work with clients with dreams. But my work with dreams is very different than the more popular stuff that's going on, because my opinion is no one knows what your dreams mean but you. It's your subconscious mind. So somebody tells you every time there's water in your dream, it means X, Y, and Z, and every time okay, but that's not how I work with them.
It goes back to the point that you were making earlier, where it's like you have no idea what it's like to be me, and
Sure.
you'd freak out if you did.
Sure,
So
and
I
I'm
think that's-
telling you that every time you have a fish in your dream, it's sex. I don't know where that comes from. So, first of all,
sexy fish.
understand that dreams are a marvelous way for the subconscious mind to be tapped. Freud made a whole career out of it. Jung afterwards made an even more interesting practice of it, creating what he called the collective unconscious. Now, he liked that word unconscious. I prefer subconscious. Because if it's a collective unconscious, we're all not aware of anything. So what's the collective? It's a big empty box. So it's collective subconscious. And that those things that we are either having repressed or suppressed can be reached through our dreams. That's the thesis of the thing. And I'd like to suggest that's true, but it's a very messy way to work because there's so much internal interference with what's actually happening. And I'd like to suggest that your dreams will run the gamut from deeply meaningful revelations about yourself and the world, all the way down to utterly irrelevant, wanky things that your brain's just doing, including what's known as stimulus incorporation. You're sleeping, and by the way, that means you're unconscious, right? But you're hearing a sound, and suddenly, the toilet's running in the back and won't stop. And suddenly you're dreaming that you're in the ocean and you're going around because you're incorporating that into your dream. Your mind is incredibly creative. I happen to live under, not directly, but under, two separate, distinct flight paths. I'm in Venice. I'm on the canals in Venice, California, LAX, and Santa Monica Airport. I have so many dreams about airplanes. And if I wasn't careful, I'd be thinking, oh my God, I don't want to fly. I'm going to die. Because some of these planes are going down. That's just stimulus incorporation into my dreams. That said, one of the merciful ways that the subconscious helps you deal with these repressed experiences, dare I say traumas, okay, is you can't handle it, but can you handle a story about it? Can you handle a metaphoric or an analog kind of story? Because that friend of yours who died too soon, that family member, that whatever it is, all right, can't cope with it. It's just too traumatic. However, I had a dream about these, we were talking about fish, about these fish. And these fish are swimming around, and I notice these fish are swimming around, and then all of a sudden one of those fish isn't there anymore. And I'm feeling something about that. The next day, I'll be asking myself, what the hell was that about fish? What do I care about carp? But there's a feeling state attached to that. I've begun to explore something that was absolutely untenable for me before. I'm dissociated from the experience. It's like now I'm in a theater seat watching a screen instead of in or associated the experience, okay? You can process by doing that. And it's happening at this subconscious level, slowly bringing that into consciousness. And I'd like to suggest that's a lot of what happens with dreams. Consciousness is a remarkable, dare I say, infinitely remarkable phenomenon. And to put it in a single box based on limited experience is just a fool's errand.
And what I'm really getting from this is to process something that might have happened and get to that feeling of resolve.
Yeah.
The dream offers a completely different medium to do that,
Sure.
because you can then use visual symbols as
Sure.
fish rather
Sure.
than words as representation or
Right.
whatever,
Right.
to get to a feeling of acceptance and incorporate that into the story that you're now telling yourself.
Right. Right.
And grow from it.
Right.
Wow, that's really cool. And yeah, I've got a lot to ponder there, and I get even more excited to go to sleep every night.
It is.
So
It's a marvelous subconscious experience.
I've got one more question for you.
Sure.
As you get more and more still, you begin this process of dissociating your awareness from the object of awareness, and that object of awareness is primarily your internal narrative. Quiet the words,
Yeah.
then you can just become that awareness. Through that, you can observe truths about yourself, you can look into your subconscious, you can work with it, etc., etc. You spend so much time there that you identify with this pure open awareness as you.
Yes.
Because you're like, well, I'm not that if I can turn that off.
Right.
You know, it's not me. But the thing that I can't turn off that feels really good to drop back into, I like that one.
That's always there no matter what I do. I can cut off my arm. I can cut off my other arm. Eventually, I can lose my body. I'm not my body. But somehow that awareness remains.
Well, I hate to do this because I'm trying to compartmentalize this into a story.
Sure.
But what has been the story of your changing experience with stillness and your idea of consciousness? And yeah, really your understanding of what it is that we're really playing with here. That's a really tough question.
It is.
I just want to stop for a second. This isn't like, what should we get for dinner tomorrow night? Which is a pretty tough question. This is like, how is your whole conception of consciousness changed over your life as you've explored it in the depths of meditative states where words don't exist? You know, it's a really bloody hard thing to do. So I just want to like really underscore that for anybody watching or listening, where it's like, this is, not only is this guy doing this today, but every other week prior to this, I have brought more and more difficult topics of conversation that have really stumped some of the most brilliant minds. And so I just hope that this gives you some sense of faith in the world, that there are people like you, Jim, that are living and are patient enough with morons like me that keep on asking these massive questions that are really, really difficult to answer.
I've asked
So I
those
just wanna
questions
say
my
thank
whole
you.
life, Henry, and I want to thank you for that. Just remember, this is just my take on it. I'm not, this isn't the way things are. This is just my take on it. So you get to a very important piece here. And one of the reasons I consider myself to be the luckiest guy on earth is when you get into this stillness practice to the point where you're not doing a rote thing that you've seen someone else do. It becomes a very personal, subjective experience. The subject is me. What is the subject of your subjective experience? Is it your body? Is it the story you're telling yourself? And these don't have to be rhetorical questions. When you quiet it down, and remember what a state of stillness is. State of pure stillness, a state of awareness with no perception of past. Not even a split second ago, and no perception of future. not even a split second from now. And in one simple, elegant stroke, that state of stillness leaves us with now. Now. The only thing that's real, the only thing that isn't some kind of past, future generated narrative in our mind. And just with familiarity, that now begins to reveal itself to be something remarkable. And the awareness, that irreducible essence of our true fundamental nature, just is. It's self-evident. You don't need to read it in a book. You don't have to listen to some geezer talking about it. You just experience it. The narrative, by definition, has to stop. There's no past, present, and future. Once upon a time, there is, and happily ever after. It's now. And the perception of now is a staggering, dare I call it, an almost overwhelming experience. Part of the problem with people who do psychedelics when they're not prepared. The narrative, everything that your ego, this narrative, is doing to hold shit together falls apart. If you're not prepared for that, that could be, dare I say, traumatic. It's the most liberating thing there is, though, because that's such a small, self-limited thing. As we continue to pursue what we're calling practical spirituality, at your pace, not the pace of some chemical, not the pace of some program that somebody set up in a monastery someplace. No, at your pace, the scope of your sense of self is going to continue to expand. And with each expanse, believe me, your life is going to get better. Don't listen to me, practice it and watch. I'm going to say it again. I'm living proof any idiot can do this, because without this, I'm an idiot. With it, amazing things happen. So my experience of consciousness has just increased in all dimensions on almost a daily basis, the deeper I go into this. But the thing to remember is I'm not sitting in the lotus position on a mountain anymore. I bought a damn mountain and tried it. That's not the way to go. You bring this back into your life. Navigate these scopes of context and watch. That's what expansion of consciousness even is. And then the quality of your life. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you are. I don't care when you are. The quality of that life experience goes up with that increased perspective.
I bought a damn mountain and tried it. That's not the way to go.
It's true.
I know.
It's up there right now. It's a beautiful mountain, by the way.
So as always, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Now, if you're looking to build a stillness practice yourself, we have a lot of free resources, audios that Jim's recorded, etc., and you can see those in our show notes below. Along with that, there are also online courses that you can roll in if you want to learn more from Jim. We also have Obsidian mind maps. You can see a couple of them popping up here on the screen. Now, these are really cool ways to look at the podcast information and really just get an overview of all of the podcast topics and deepen the information within yourself. And within them, there are more of Jim's recordings. There's also a lot of Jim's artwork. So if you're interested in any more still life stuff, you can find a bunch of links in the description below. Finally, I really hope that you're getting as much out of this as I have. This is why we started this whole thing in the first place, because the combination of Jim and the practice of stillness had really helped to transform our lives here at Still Life. We just wanted to make as much of that available to you. So hopefully you're getting a lot out of it, and please let us know if there's anything that you want to see more of in the future, or less of. Anyway, hope you have a lovely day. Bye-bye.